Welcome back to the Snowpoint Cast. Today we're going to be talking about a deck from 2010 called Regigigas. So Regigigas got top 16 at the World Championship in 2010. A guy named Tommy S from Finland top 16 with it. I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name because I'm going to butcher it. It's Finnish. But he wrote a tournament report on this deck. Really interesting read. I'm going to link that in the description. It's kind of a cool article. So this list is based off his list as well as another guy in the Pokemon community. His name is Jay Hornug. He wrote an article about 2010 decks and he put a Regigigas list in that. So this is kind of based off a little bit of his list and a little bit of Jay's list. But let's get right into it. So starting off with two Regigigas. Regigigas has 100 HP, 4 retreat, a weakness to fighting, and then 2 attack. So the first attack, Drag Off, which is really strong, does 30 for 3 colorless. And before doing damage, you can choose one of your opponent's bench Pokemon and then bring it active. So really good board disruption early. I mean, especially against Spiritomb decks. It lets you get out of that Spiritomb lock, which is really nice. Being able to do a lot of damage to a Garchomp is really good too. It actually lets you one-shot a Garchomp if you have a Crobat and an Expert Belt. So you put an Expert Belt on, you're doing 102 a Garchomp, and then with a Crobat drops 110, and that's a knockout. So definitely a really solid option against Garchomp decks. The second attack, Giga Hammer. So for 4 colorless, it does 80, and then this Pokemon can't use Giga Hammer during your next turn. So that can be reset by switching to the bench, and we're going to go over that in just a second, some interesting options that you have with the Level X. But the Level X, so 150 HP on a Level X on a basic is like the highest on a basic Level X, really, really high. 4 retreat, a weakness to fighting, and the Poke power called Sacrifice. So essentially what Sacrifice does is you can choose a Pokemon that you have in play and then you knock it out. And then after that, you can search your discard pile for 2 basic energy and attach it to Regigigas, and then you heal 8 damage from Regigigas. So really solid healing and really good acceleration as well. So you play like the attack requirement is a water, a fighting, a metal, and a colorless. So that's like really, really hard to fulfill, but Sacrifice helps with that a lot. So Giga Blaster, for a water, a fighting, a metal, and a colorless, it does 100, and then it discards the top card of your opponent's deck, and then you choose a card at random from their hand and discard it. So that mill is really good, and the more you attack with Giga Blaster, the more you can potentially discard important resources from your opponent's deck in hand. So Giga Blaster is a really, really good attack. Can't use this attack next turn. Something interesting that you can do to get around that. So usually what you want to be doing is attaching to Regigigas because it's your main attacker. So something interesting you can do is if you have 2 extra energy attached, you can go like retreat, say like you have a DCE attached extra. So you have all the 4 energy and then a DCE. You can retreat the DCE and 2 of the energies, like a fighting and a metal, let's say, put a Pokemon active, okay? So when it goes to the bench, it resets Giga Blaster. It says you can't use this next turn, but if a Pokemon ever goes to the bench, all conditions that it had in the active are reset. So even the condition of Giga Blaster can't use this next turn, when it goes to the bench, that's not applied anymore. So you can do that, switch a Pokemon into the active, sacrifice the active Pokemon to get the 2 energy back that you just retreated with, and then you can Giga Blaster again. So really interesting strategy that you can do with that, and Giga Blaster is a really, really strong attack. Okay, getting into the support Pokemon. So Uxie, you play 3 Uxie, 70 HP, single retreat, and a weakness to Psychic. It's got a power called Setup, which is like the reason you play it. So Setup, when you bench Uxie from your hand to your bench, you can draw until you have 7 cards in your hand. So really strong power. And then the attack Psychic Restore for 20 does 20, and then you can put Uxie and all cards attached to the bottom of your deck if you'd like. So being able to get that Uxie off the board can be really important depending on what you're playing against. Like Garchomp feeds off that and Gengar feeds off that. So being able to get that back in the deck is really nice. And being able to hit for Psychic weakness against some decks is really solid as well. So you're playing a Uxie Level X as well. So 1 Uxie Level X got 90 HP, a single retreat, and a weakness to Psychic. The power that it has is called Trade-Off. Trade-Off is really good. So look at you can activate this power once during a turn. Look at the top 2 cards of your deck, take one of them, put them in your hand, and then you put the other card to the bottom of your deck. So really solid draw and just keeps you consistent. You're seeing cards. And Zenblade, the attack on Uxie, is pretty good as well. So for a DCE, it does 60, and you do play DCE. So being able to hit that 60 is really nice, especially against like Gardevoir. I mean, if they have a Gardevoir Level X, you have a Crobat and a Zenblade, and then you kill it, which is really good. And then Uxie can't use his attack during your next turn. So knowing that you have that option for an attack is solid depending on the situation. 3 Mesprit. This is a really interesting part of this deck. So not a lot of decks in this format can afford the bench space to play Mesprit, but this deck is one of those decks that can, and it actually relies on Mesprit. So Mesprit's got 70 HP, a single retreat, and a weakness to Psychic, and the reason you play it is for its power called Psychic Bind. So when you bench Mesprit, the power essentially says your opponent can't use powers during their next turn. So really, really solid power. Being able to shut stuff off, especially turn 1. Like if you hit a Mesprit turn 1 and your opponent's only out to draws, like a collector for an Uxie, they're just not drawing cards during their turn 1 if you went first and benched it a Mesprit. So like really, really interesting card, and being able to kill it with sacrifice is one of the reasons that it's so good, is because the reason Mesprit is kind of bad is you have to fill your bench up with Mesprits and then your bench is just dead. And those Mesprits are kind of, they're sitting ducks at that point. They're just asking to get Garchomp sniped or Gengar sniped or, you know, whatever. But the nice part about Regigigas is you can sacrifice it, heal the damage off Regigigas, and then get it back and use it again. You also play super scoop ups, so you can keep the lock by benching them, sacrificing them, and recovering them, or scooping them up and using them again. So yeah, really, really solid card. You also play one Azelf. So you play 2 Azelf, but this is the one with the Downer material body. So 60 HP, a single retreat, a weakness to psychic. It's got a body called Downer material. Downer material says if you have a Uxie, a Mesprit, and an Azelf in play, Downer material is activated. Your opponent's basic Pokemon pay 1 colorless more to attack. So really solid against any SP deck or decks that even like attack with SP attackers. Like Jumpluff plays multi-energy so they can attack with Luxray, and being able to stop them from attacking with Luxray is good, but being able to force Garchomp to pay 3 to snipe something is really solid as well, because you usually have a lot of bench Pokemon that Garchomp wants to hit, and Garchomp, it seems kind of bad, but you actually hit it for Dragon weakness. So in addition of hitting them for normal weakness and locking their energy cost to 1 more, I feel like this deck definitely can take on a Garchomp for sure. So yeah, that Azelf is an SP tech. You play one of this Azelf as well. So the Azelf from Legends Awakened got Time Walk. So 70 HP, a single retreat, and a weakness to Psychic. Time Walk says when you bench Azelf, you can search your prizes for a Pokemon and then put it in your hand. Staple consistency. You play a bunch of like thin lines. You can play a 2/2 of the Regigigas, so prizing any of that is really bad. Prizing your Mesprits are bad. There's just a lot of stuff that you really don't want to prize. So being able to recover that from the prizes is really good, and that's why you play Azelf. You play Regice as well. So Regice is really interesting, and it's kind of an important part to the deck as well. So 90 HP, 3 retreat, and a weakness to metal. You play it for the power. You can attack, but I'm not going to talk about the attack because it's not really something you do. So the power, you can discard 2 cards from your hand, and then if your opponent's active Pokemon is a basic Pokemon, they switch it with one of their bench Pokemon. So really cool because it lets you get those energy cards in the discard to be able to sacrifice and get them back. So definitely solid for getting energy cards in your discard. You search it with a collector, and then all of a sudden you might be able to Giga Blaster on turn 2. So it just lets you speed your deck up a little bit. And you play a 1/1 of the Abomasnow line as well. So this is actually an interesting tech. So the Snover, first of all, the first tech it's got is called Hide. Flip a coin. If heads, prevent all effective attack, including damage next turn. So Powder Snow does 10, and then the defending Pokemon is now asleep. So definitely, you know, 2 okay stall tactics. But the reason you play that is for Abomasnow. So Abomasnow is really great. 100 HP, 3 retreat, weakness to fire. So it's got a Poke body called it's called Snowveil. All damage to your Pokemon is reduced by 20, so that's kind of cool. Like you're able to stop stuff like Garchomp from sniping out your Mesprits because they take 80 minus 20 is 60, and they have 70 HP. So definitely a cool part about that card. And then it has 2 attacks. So the first one's Snowplay for a DCE. It does 20 damage to your opponent's bench non-water or grass Pokemon. So really solid. Regigigas is able to hit for 100, but being able to hit 110 and 130 are really important numbers in this format. So Crobat lets you hit 110, but if you snipe stuff with Abomasnow first, it lets you get to 130, which is another really important number. So being able to snipe before you get a knockout with Regigigas is really good. Okay, so the second attack is called Below Zero. It does 60, and then if Abomasnow evolved from Snover this turn, your opponent's paralyzed. So interesting attack, and the reason that you really play this card is for Mewtwo level X. You don't play any evolved Pokemon other than the Abomasnow, so a Mewtwo just stops you from playing the game. It has a Pokebody that just lets it not get touched by basic Pokemon, and that's all you play other than the Abomasnow. So something interesting you can do is if they put a Mewtwo up and they're like, deal with this Mewtwo, you can be like, okay, put a water on a Snover. Next turn, attach a DCE, evolve into Abomasnow. Below 0, you're paralyzed in the active. So unless they have a switch out, they're dead because they're paralyzed, and then the next turn they wake up from paralyzed, but then you hit them for another 60, and that's a knockout. So Abomasnow is really a Mewtwo level X counter, but it has some other really cool uses as well. You also play one Giratina. So Giratina's got 100 HP, 3 retreat, a resistance to colorless, and then a weakness to dark. So you play it for Let Loose. Let Loose says when you play this Pokemon from your hand to your bench, both players shuffle their hand to their deck, and then they can draw up to 4. I don't know why you wouldn't draw 4, but I mean, you could draw up to 4, I guess, if you're going to get decked. But yeah, so really good hand disruption. It's interesting because you play Judge as well, so you can go hand disruption and then Giga Blaster to discard a card from their hand, and then all of a sudden they're at 3 cards, and that's like a lot to deal with sometimes, especially if Giga Blaster is able to snag that like one consistency out that you drew off of the Giratina or the Judge. So definitely a solid hand disruption. An interesting tech card that you can play in this deck is Giratina Level X. I don't play it in my current list, but depending on the meta, I would consider putting it into this deck. So essentially what Giratina does is it's got 130 HP, 3 retreat, a resistance to normal, and then a weakness to darkness. So Invisible Tentacles is the body. Essentially what Invisible Tentacles says is every time your opponent tries to attack, they have to discard a card from their hand, and if they can't discard a card from their hand, they just straight can't attack. So this fits in with the milling that Regigigas Level X does. So it's kind of interesting that you like mill a card from their deck in their hand every time, and then if you're able to get this up, they're just milling like crazy, and it's a solid option to be watching is your opponent's deck. If they're running out of cards, and it's more likely that you're going to win a game by deck out than by taking enough prizes to win the game, then that's an option that this deck has, is you can go for a deck out instead of trying to play for prizes. And this card just helps with that. There are some other techs that I do like a little bit better than this card, because you have to have a warp point for it to be really effective, because you have to level X the Giratina in the active, which isn't that uncommon. Like, you can hit that, but you have to have the warp point in your hand so that you can switch it with your bench Pokemon. So that's kind of one of the reasons I don't play this tech, is it's a little bit inconsistent, but it's definitely really cool for a mill strategy. Deck also plays one Crobat G. So Crobat G just helps a lot with your numbers. You play Regigigas Level X does 100, and just being able to hit 110 is really, really effective. You play Super Scoop Ups as well, so you get to potentially use multiple of your Crobats, which is really nice. You play an Unown Q as well. So Unown Q essentially says you could turn it into a tool card, and then if it's attached to a Pokemon with the Pokemon that it's attached to gets 1 less retreat. So solid with Mesprit, Uxie, Azelf. There's a lot of Pokemon in the deck that have 1 retreat. There are a couple that have 3, but all the sprites have 1. So being able to retreat the sprites and get a Dragoff off, or Psychic Restore, kind of lets you do whatever you want. Interesting thing you can do is if you put a Uxie up with it, you can level X the Uxie while it's active, and then put a quick on it and retreat it to bench, and then you get trade off as a consistency out for the rest of the game. So definitely a solid option there. And then this is the other interesting tech that this deck plays. So Relicanth has 2 attacks, 80 HP, a single retreat, and a weakness to grass. So the first attack is called Grand Swell. So Grand Swell says for each of your opponent's Pokemon tool cards and stadium cards in play, choose one of your opponent's Pokemon in play, and then this attack does 30 damage to it. So the main use for this card is for Luxray Level X. You hit Luxray for fighting weakness, and usually Luxray attacks you with an energy gain. They just go like lightning, energy gain, and then they're able to start hitting you. And the great part about Grand Swell is if they have an energy gain on their Luxray and an energy gain on the Garchomp on a bench, which is not that all uncommon. A lot of the times they'll like slap an energy gain on the Garchomp, because then they have that ability to just put a DCE on and kill one of your bench Pokemon that has 80 or less HP for a DCE. And Relicanth is great because if your opponent ever does take that, like they go Luxray Level X, Bright Look, and then they kill something with Flash Impact, you have a response to that. You can just go fight, or depending on their board, right? Like if they have 2 energy gains on their board, or like an Expert Belt and an energy gain, for 1 fighting energy, you have that potential to return knockout a Luxray, which I think is a really good option because Luxray is a very important part of this format. We're getting into the trainer cards now. You play 4 Super Scoop Up. Super Scoop Up is for a lot of things. You can heal your Regigigas with it. You're able to use different powers multiple times in a turn, so you can use like Flash Bite multiple times in a turn. You're able to get a Mesprit off, link it turns in a row, so you can like Mesprit 1 turn, Super Scoop it up, and then put it down the next turn as well. So that's an interesting part you can do with it. But yeah, just like solid. You can scoop up a Uxie with it as well for draw. It just has like a lot of options in the deck. And having another healing out for Regigigas is really important too, because you don't ever want your Regigigas to die. I mean, they're gonna die, but you want to prevent that for as long as you can before your opponent knocks out a Regigigas, and scoop up kind of just lets you delay that by a little bit. Okay, so the next card is Pokey Healer Plus. Pokey Healer Plus is a really interesting part of this deck, and it's part of Jay Hornug's list that I really like. So Pokey Healer Plus says you can play one of this card, and then you heal one special condition and one damage counter from one of your Pokemon. But if you play two at the same time, you can heal 8 damage counters and all special conditions from your active Pokemon. So it only works on your active Pokemon, but you only have Regigigas active really that you want to use it on. So it's definitely nice there. Something interesting that Pokey Healer helps you with is, so Blaziken FB has this attack called Luring Flame, and Luring Flame is actually really, really bad for this deck. So Luring Flame says, essentially pick one of your opponent's bench Pokemon, bring it up, and then that Pokemon's now burned. So really bad for Regigigas, especially if you haven't gotten a sacrifice off yet. Like if they hit you with that on like turn 2 or something, and you haven't got a sacrifice off, it means that you don't get sacrifice until you get that out of the active. But when you have a Pokey Healer Plus, you can just heal that burn, heal a damage if you got a damage from a Tails Flip from the burn, and then you have access to sacrifice again. So that's an interesting part about the card. Also, it's just really good for healing. I mean, you want to be healing as much as you can with this deck, and sacrifice is great for healing, but a lot of the times, like, you can't really afford to be letting your opponent take a free prize. And Pokey Healer just lets you, like, get that healing without giving your opponent free prizes. Okay, so you play 2 Pokecoms as well. You play a lot of Pokemon in this deck, so 2 Pokemon communication makes sense. Just lets you search out a lot of different Pokemon. Yeah, you put a Pokemon from your hand on top of your deck, and then search your deck for a Pokemon and put it in your hand, and then shuffle your deck. So solid consistency card for sure. You play 2 Warp Point as well. So you do play some Pokemon with some fat retreat, like Abomasnow and Giratina and Regice and Regigigas. So being able to have an out to get those out of the active is really good. Something interesting you can do with Warp Point as well is if you have an Unown Q on a Sprite, or if you have a Crobat on your bench, you can Warp Point your opponent. You switch the Regigigas to the bench, and like I said, when you go to the bench, you reset that can't attack next turn effect off of Giga Blaster and Giga Hammer. So you are able to use both of those attacks if you use them the previous turn. So being able to Giga Blaster 2 turns in a row is really effective, and Warp Point lets you do that. You play 2 Expert Belt as well. Expert Belt is super solid. It gives your Regigigas 170 HP, and it lets them do 120 damage. And 120 damage is much more effective than 100. Like I was saying, a lot of the Pokemon in this format have either 130 or 110 HP. So being able to straight knock out that 110 HP Pokemon is great, but also being able to get up to the numbers where you hit 130 Pokemon HP with a Flash Bite with a Crobat is another essential part of Expert Belt. You play 2 Time Space Distortion. This is a really interesting card that this deck plays. So Time Space Distortion, flip 3 coins for each heads, take a Pokemon out of your discard pile and put it in your hand. So really, really interesting. There's another option in this deck that you have in terms of techs, and that's Pokemon Rescue. So Pokemon Rescue is the quote-unquote more consistent version of this card, but I actually don't think that's true because, okay, we're going to talk a little Pokemon math here. So you're flipping 3 coins, okay? When you flip a coin, you have a 50% chance to get the outcome that you want, okay? You have a 50% chance to get heads. So 50-50, okay? You flip 2 coins. Now you have same 50-50 odds, but twice. So you're having 2 odds to potentially do that. And then the third time, when you have 3 coins in action, the odds that you don't get any Pokemon back are like 1 in 8. So like very, very infrequent. And you know, if you're feeling not ballsy, you can definitely just switch these out with Pokemon Rescues, just get a Pokemon back. But more often than not, you're going to be getting 1 Pokemon back, and then sometimes you're going to be getting 2, and especially when you're like locking with Mesprit, being able to take back 2 Mesprit and then keep that Psychic Bind going can be the difference between keeping a power lock on your opponent and not keeping a power lock on your opponent, and that can be really important in the course of a game. So Time Space Distortion, really interesting. You can definitely switch that out with Pokemon Rescue if you're not a gambling man, but I myself am a gambling man, and I like flipping coins, so I do like that card a lot. It's kind of a fun card this deck plays. Interesting fact about this card, it it was a really rare pull. I think it was like 1 in 3 boxes that you were able to get this card, and it was like stupid expensive when it came out. It's like $3 now, so it's not that expensive, but it used to be like really expensive. Okay, so you play 1 Premier Ball as well. So Premier Ball lets you search for a level X. So you can search for that Uxie or Regigigas, and if you choose to play the Giratina, it gets you a Giratina as well. Finding that Regigigas is really important because you need to have access to sacrifice as soon as you can so that you can get up and attacking. Finding the Uxie is definitely nice as well, depending on the matchup. Being able to hit for Psychic Weakness, it just makes you consistent. Okay, now getting into the supporter cards. So you play 3 Pokemon Collector. Pokemon Collector is a really solid card. Search your deck for 3 basic Pokemon and then put them into your hand. So lets you find stuff like Uxie, Mesprit, Regigigas if you started something that's not any of those. So you can bench your Regigigas, attach an energy to it, Mesprit to Psychic Lock your opponent, and then you can set up yourself. So definitely a really interesting part about this card that lets you do a lot of things in one turn, especially you play so many sprites that have like useful powers. So being able to have access to all those is really good too. Collector is really good too because it lets you find your tech Pokemon as well. So like Regice, let's say you have 2 basic energy in your hand, you just want to get them in the discard so that you can sacrifice for them. Collector lets you just search that Regice, and it just keeps you really consistent. Collector is a really, really good card. Okay, so you play 3 Felicity's Drawing. So Felicity's Drawing says you can discard up to 2 cards from your hand. If you discard 1, draw 3. If you discarded 2, draw 4. So again, getting those basic energy into the discard so that you can sacrifice with it later. Felicity's is cool because if you ever have any dead cards, like Relicanth isn't good in some matchups, you're just able to discard them and thin them. So that's definitely a solid part of Felicity's. Play 2 Roseanne's Research. So being able to find the basic energies that you need is really good. It lets you search for 2 in a combination of basic energy and Pokemon. So you can find something like a basic energy and a Uxie to draw cards, or if you have enough setup and you just need to get energy in the discard, you can get 2 energies with Roseanne's and then discard them with a Regice to sacrifice them back on. There's a lot of options that you have with Roseanne's that are really good. And then you play 2 Judge. So Judge is a really solid card in this deck. Like I said with Giratina, I mean, putting your opponent to 4 is really good, but putting them to 3 is even better because you discard a card from their hand and the top of their deck. So definitely putting them to 4 when you have the option to discard a card from their hand, guaranteed. I mean, going to 3 is not where you want to be. If you're getting judged to 3, you might be in a bit of a trouble, especially if your opponent's discarding a random card from your hand. Okay, so getting into the energy cards, you should play 3 Metal Energy, 3 Water Energy, and 3 Fighting Energy. So something kind of interesting that I didn't talk about before when I was talking about Regigigas Level X, that Pokemon did is they took some of the lore from the video game and they put it in the card game. So this is actually a really neat part about this deck is the Regigigas in the video game, in Diamond and Pearl, when you go to the Snowpoint Temple, you can like find Regigigas, but he's just like not activated. But if you have a Registeel, a Regice, and a Regirock in your party, that's how Regigigas gets activated. So it's kind of interesting how its second attack and like the important attack on in the deck that's really good requires a metal, a fighting, and a water to activate. Kind of just like a cool lore that Pokemon did there. You also play 4 DCE. DCE just lets you use Dragoff really consistently, lets you find attacks with Zen Blade, and it just keeps you consistent, right? Like your first 2 attacks on the basic Regigigas are DCEs. So if you find a DCE and then another colorless, you're able to Dragoff, and if you find 2 DCEs, you can start Giga Hammering. But yeah, DCE is just a really solid card and important to this format for sure. But yes, this has been Regigigas. If you have any questions about the deck, leave them in the comments below and I'll do my best to get to them. But yeah, thank you so much for tuning in and we'll see you next time.